What makes this particular variant of Mark Grayson so much better than his counterparts, not just in terms of his morals, but his strength and his power levels as well? During the adaptation of the Invincible War in Season 3 of the show, we learned that more than a dozen alternate Marks have been scouted by Angstrom Levy to create a bloodlusted invincible strike force that will lay siege to Earth in this home timeline. They wreaked havoc across the world, killing indiscriminately, and caused the single greatest cataclysmic event in the history of this world that we know of. Despite Invincible being regarded as the strongest hero in this reality, multiple Invincibles were defeated by not just Cecil, Mark, and Eve, but by an assortment of heroes from across the planet. And there actually seems to be a reason that this relates to Mark's own morality. Our Mark was not told about his father's true intentions until his powers manifested, and he spent some time training, and by that point, Mark in this reality was already 17. He had been raised with good morals and a healthy social life on Earth. So when Omni-Man revealed the truth, he couldn't bear the thought of losing his world to an empire that he had never met. But there is a difference between this Mark and his other counterparts as well. This reality seems to be the only one that we currently know of where Nolan is not completely lost, but that's a deciding factor. It all comes down to Nolan and whether or not he is redeemable. In order to illustrate this though, we have to divide the differences between the Marks who resist Omni-Man and those who submit to him. Whether because the Marks were raised differently or because they submitted to him after their iconic Chicago fight and beat down at the end of Season 1. In realities where Nolan is able to either convince Mark and do it early, or to raise him with the knowledge of Viltrum's true intentions, he is able to turn his son relatively quickly. In every alternate reality that we see, Omni-Man is still taking the lead on the invasion. Mark is his right-hand man and he fully agrees, but as a result, he is coddled and he doesn't have to go through nearly as much punishment as the mainline Invincible does. Not even close. For tougher threats, he always has his father by his side to help pick up the slack and provide backup when Mark gets out of his depth. But our Mark is actively training to the best of his abilities so that he can prepare for the inevitable day when the Viltrumite Empire arrives on Earth. Mark needs to be ready for a greater threat. We see at the beginning of Season 3 that Cecil and the GDA are spared no expense when it comes to preparing Mark for his father's return. Invincible's strength has doubled, and his speed and endurance are showing respectable improvements as well since the end of Season 2, and it's because he's put much more work in than his other multiversal counterparts have. A lot more work. In his mind, he is all that stands in the way of the Viltrumites, who have all the same abilities that he has with centuries of experience and an insatiable bloodlust that makes them far more vicious than he is, at least currently. Every battle where he is beaten down, every fight that Mark loses is making him stronger, and this is a level of conditioning that he just does not have while Omni-Man is on Earth by his side, backing him up in all of the dangerous cases. But let's circle back to the Marks and the variants that resist. When he develops his powers late enough in life, we know that versions like our mainline Mark fight back. But what sets our Mark apart is this corner in Nolan's morality. Nolan is a soldier with an assignment, and he is one of Viltrum's most respected conquerors. This is a post that he has held firm for centuries across countless worlds. Despite everything he's been conditioned to believe, he actually begins to feel genuine remorse for his actions, seemingly for the first time in his entire existence. At the end of Season 1, he beats his own son within a brink of his life in order to instill in him the greatness of the Viltrum Empire, but Mark remains steadfast against him. He continues to love his father regardless, and in this reality, Omni-Man begins to love him back completely. Mark broke his dad. He sent him flying into the depths of space as penance for his actions, so when he finally gets to Thraxa, he is able to see that these morals develop in real time within his father. Nolan was too late to see the Earth for what it was, but after his fight with Mark, he begins to see the Thraxans in a different light, despite them being what he refers to as inferior beings. Nolan even directly asks Mark why he is feeling this way, because he is not supposed to. This is horrifying when we start to think about the realities where he doesn't feel this way though. There is no telling how many universes where a Chicago fight between Mark and his father, or a similar showdown when Nolan revealed his true intentions, and more importantly, there is no way to calculate how many good Marks have died fighting Nolan as a result. If Invincible stands up against Omni-Man, then there are countless variants who have no problem doing just as Nolan threatened, which is to wait another 17 years and to have another kid. In just how many realities does Nolan actually kill Mark right here? How many versions of Nolan remain steadfast in their objective, despite the fact that Mark has rebelled? And is this why there aren't very many good variants of Mark in the multiverse? When Angstrom transfers the multiverse to assemble a team of his own selves, we get to see multiple timelines where he is a noble resistance fighter, or even some where Angstrom is a revolutionary, and Invincible is the villain. Debbie even calls him out on this when he breaks into their home, because Debbie figures out that this is the only reality where Mark is truly good and Angstrom is truly bad, and that this is what is eating him alive inside. That in other realities, Angstrom is the hero, but never here. If we do some basic math, we can figure out how rare this occurrence is, and the answer comes from the credits of Season 2. Sterling K. Brown is credited as voicing Angstrom Levy, but also Angstrom from 646, implying that there are at least 646 variants of the character in the Invincible multiverse. Of course though, this figure has never been officially confirmed and we're just using the credits, we do believe it proves our point. If we use this as a baseline, then it would mean that Angstrom has assimilated the memories of more than 600 multiversal counterparts. Because remember, he cannot differentiate between which memories are his and which belong to other versions of himself from across the multiverse. Despite having the collective wisdom of upwards of 600 Angstroms though, he cannot fathom the idea of Invincible being a hero, meaning that nowhere in these 600 universes is Invincible regarded as a good guy. So if this universe is 1 in 600, then we are definitely looking at an instance of survivorship bias. The full study of survivorship bias is a bit more elaborate, but the best way to illustrate this succinctly is with a thought experiment from back in World War II. Back during the war, Dr. Abram Wald was measuring the survival rates of planes that sustained damage in combat. He was doing this in order to figure out where the weakest points on their aircraft really were. He would then write up a proposition to reinforce the planes in order to make them safer for the pilots. He looked through damage patterns to figure out which areas of the planes were being hit the most, and then he suggested to his team that they should reinforce those areas of the plane that were not showing damage across all of their samples. Baffled though, his colleagues asked him how this made any sense, and his answer was a simple one: because the planes taking damage on those areas were not coming home, and thus they were not being accounted for. A similar thing happened in World War I, when the new Brody helmet was introduced. The phenomenon just didn't take a name yet though. Armies from across the world started using these helmets, and immediately they saw a spike in head injuries when soldiers returned home from combat. The natural reaction is to wonder if the helmet is causing these head injuries, but this wasn't the case. Instead, what was actually happening is these people were surviving injuries to the head because of the fact that they were wearing the helmet, so an increase in injury rates actually meant that the helmet was working effectively. We say this because we may be looking at a situation where this is the one good mark for every 600 evil marks, but instead, it may be a case where the good marks are being systematically killed off in all adjacent realities. Realities where Omni-Man does not have this strong of morals. A universe may as well have a 50-50 chance of producing a good or a bad version of Mark, but it's almost exclusively the bad ones that survive long term. All of these factors swirl together into a perfect storm to create the Mark Grayson that we know and love. And this is what sets him apart from all the other interdimensional Marks. He is old enough to develop a healthy social life before manifesting his abilities. He then stood up against his father even though he knew he couldn't win. And he also was a version of Nolan that hesitated to kill Mark. And as far as we can tell, this is the only Mark that grew up in this perfect combination of circumstances. There is also something to be said about Debbie, who is the heart and soul of the entire universe, and absolutely played a role in helping develop Mark's morals. We see that the masked Mark is only here to bring her back to his home timeline, and a huge important detail is that in many of the most sinister realities with Invincible, Debbie dies, allowing Mark to completely slip into his father's grasp. She is not just the moral anchor of the show, but Mark's own beacon. And now that Oliver is growing up, we get some insight into how she treated Mark when he was very young as well. She ends up supporting Oliver in his pursuit to help people. Because of Debbie, Oliver has become a hero. When he first began his heroics though, we see that he logically believes that killing his enemies would be the safest and the most effective way to neutralize threats. He is completely unbothered by death, and has no qualms with killing the likes of the Maulers or other criminals that he comes across. As a half-Viltrumite with powers comparable to Mark, this is a terrifying prospect, especially because of a strictly logical sense. He's not entirely wrong in what he's doing. Debbie, however, is the one who finally communicates the value of life to him, and it gets him to start understanding why people are inherently valuable. She is his moral center, just as she is Mark's. And in worlds that don't have Debbie, Mark begins to slip. And it's no accident that one of the most compassionate alternate Marks is the one that is in this reality to bring his mother back. When the Viltrumites arrive, Mark will be ready because he has been putting himself through much more training than any of his counterparts. And when the Viltrumites inevitably arrive, you can rest assured that Invincible is ready. But anyway, my friends, what do you think of the differences between our Mark and the other variants of Mark that we see in the Invincible War? What are your thoughts on why our Mark is so much more powerful? and also one of the only good Invincibles in the entire multiverse that are left. Does this explain why he's morally and physically superior? And in how many realities do you think Mark is killed by his father for resisting the Viltrumite Empire? But as always, my friends, smash that subscribe button for more Invincible lore, and have a great day.